thrilled that you're here to share this with us.
Anyway, so my name is Shawna and I have been doing positive reinforcement for forever, it seems like, but okay, so a little bit about my start. So years ago, when I was a little girl, I wasn't a horse kid. And there's a reason for that. When I was sexually abused from the time I was 3 till I was 16. And in that process, this meant when I would go see the horses, my granddad had horses on the farm. He had a hobby farm, and so he had horses. And they were quarter horses that you see to this day that people say are good horses. And they were considered good horses. But as a little kid, I started recognizing, it's probably about 6 years old, I started recognizing, but the horses are hard to catch. Once we catch them, we can do whatever we wish, but they're hard to catch. So I kind of realized they don't like this. They don't feel like they have a choice. And so I decided I didn't want to have any part of that. I didn't want to be part of imposing ourselves on the horses. And this was really important to me. Now, I did not know, but at that little age, I was seeing myself and my predicament in those horses. And so they were in a state of learned helplessness, as was I. So when they got to a certain situation, I had no power to stop what was happening to me. So I was being imposed upon. I saw this in the horses, and it made me very uncomfortable. So I made a choice. I'm not going to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that. And so I didn't. I decided I love the horses. Let's keep that in mind. It's not that I didn't like them. I did. I love the horses, but I didn't want to contribute to this not having a choice in things. So at the ripe old age of 7, I made a decision to myself that I wasn't going to be a part of any person or any animal's life unless I improved their quality of life. Now, pretty quick, I realized, but people are complicated. People have a choice. They can, people can figure this out for themselves. But I stuck with the wish for me to not be a part of any animal's life if I didn't help to improve their quality of life in one way, shape, or form. And so this was something, after all, the animals don't have a choice. They didn't choose to be where they are, none of them. We made this choice for them. So to me, I felt like it was really important to be good stewards for them. So this is where I didn't know this was going to be something I lived by 50 years later, but here I am, and it is something I live for. And why I think it is really important is because to this day, I see those good horses. And I see shut down horses, and I see horses that aren't always, they'll be like, oh, he's great. He doesn't even bat an eye when the truck runs into him or whatever, and you're like, I don't think that, but helping people to recognize and understand and see that they are sentient beings and to make the most of what we can do. That's really important to me. So where I did learn to train animals, however, was with marine mammals. So I was going along and going to school and going to university, wanting to study field study of terrestrial animals. And then I went and took a field study of finback whales, and I loved it, and I kind of thought, why was I thinking marine mammals? So I started looking into it, and then I got a job with tours and education with marine mammals, and that's where I started. Then the next summer, a position came up in animal training, and I tried out, and I got the position, and I worked there for 10 years. So it was whales, dolphins, sea lions, walruses, otters, and everything we did with those guys was positive reinforcement. And that's all there was to it. We had no halters, no lead ropes, everything they did. They got all their food each and every day, regardless of what they did or didn't do. They got all their social interactions each and every day, regardless of what they did or didn't do. So we had nothing on them. It was our job then to teach the training so that it was fun. So it was a choice they made, that they liked to do it, they wanted to do it. And the other thing was, because we were one of the biggest parks in the world, we were expected to do things at a very high criteria. So there we had to get things to be very, very high criteria, but they had to be fun the entire time. So that was our challenge. And that was something that I enjoyed doing, I loved doing. And so after I was there probably about 9 years, I got tickets to see a show jumping Grand Prix, and that was in California. And it was from people who owned the park was Anheuser-Busch, and it was Elizabeth Bush Burke of Anheuser-Busch gave us trainers tickets to see the Grand Prix. So we all go, and I go, or some of us went. There's 40 trainers, but a group of us went, and I was kind of like, wait, I want to do this. So then it began. So this is where I kind of looked into it. By this point, I knew how to train animals and help them to like and enjoy what they're doing. And I'll admit, that night, I saw some horses who didn't seem to like what they did. But I saw some horses who did like what they did. And it just looked like a walk in the park. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want that horse. And so that's where I started looking into it. I had access to Grand Prix show jumpers. So I kept asking them, you know, why don't we train horses with, why don't you train horses with positive reinforcement? Why is it done like this? What? And I kept hearing, horses aren't smart enough to learn like this. This is not how it's done. It's just not blah, blah, blah. And I kept hearing all these things. Well, I sat on the board of an organization called the International Marine Animal Trainers Association, also called IMATA. And because I was on the executive board, once a year we would have conferences where people come from marine mammal trainers would come from all around the world, and some zoo trainers too. And then and we'd also have meetings, executive meetings, once a year. So this meant twice a year I would go to zoos and aquariums and see trained animals, target trained animals. I had seen target trained hyenas, meerkats, hippos, rhinos, lions, tigers, bears, giraffes, llamas, electric eels, sharks, goldfish. So when I kept hearing that horses couldn't be trained this way, I thought, you know, I can't say they can because I haven't done it, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me that a meerkat could get it, but a horse wouldn't. But anyway, so I kept looking and I kept hearing no. Finally, I read this magazine. It was a People magazine. True confession. It was a People magazine, and in there was an article about a man named Tom Dorrance. So I didn't know who he was. But I called him. And so I called him on the phone and I said, I'm a marine mammal trainer, I'm working with marine mammals, and I would like to take the positive reinforcement training to horses. And he was very supportive. He said, yep, you definitely should do this. Turned out he had used used food with some horses. He didn't know how to systematically do it, so he knew it made a difference in some situations, but he didn't really know how to do it like we did as marine mammal trainers. So he encouraged me to do it. He invited me to come to his ranch and to come and stay with him and put it into effect with him. And I was like, I have to work. Who is this man? But anyway, so I didn't know who he was. It would have been pretty good if I would have gone there and discovered that with him, but I didn't. But he was the one, from that conversation with him, I realized I'm moving forward now. Now that I got somebody who kind of seemed to think it was okay, I decided to move forward. From that conversation, I decided to take lessons. I took jumping lessons. After all, I was going to be a Grand Prix show jumper, but I didn't know what posting was, so, you know, had a little ways to go. But anyway, so from that discussion, I went and I took lessons. But there's something else. So not only did he encourage me to go forward, there's something else in hindsight that I look at that I think is really valuable. Knowing now that Tom Dorrance serves as the guru behind a lot of our natural horsemanship type people, yet those people tend to see what he did as the end. You know, they look at his work as the final, you know, this is the way you do it, the end. And he didn't. He wanted to learn more. He knew there was more to learn. So that to me is really, really important for me to keep in mind, that there is going to be more to learn, that this isn't the end. We aren't at I just want to keep an open mind and keep learning every single day. You know, 20 years, I might be looking here going, remember when we thought that was it? You know, that we may learn and know so much more. So anyway, so from there, I went and I got started, and I started taking riding lessons, and within a month, I bought a horse, and I stopped working with the marine mammals. I would now ride along with the vet, ride along with the farrier. I'd ride every horse that was out there. I was busy trying to learn how it was done with horses, how it was done traditionally. Because you can't come in and just change it if you don't even know what's going on. That didn't seem to me the most effective way to do it. So I was going along, and I had a boyfriend at the time who was a Grand Prix show jumper, but he had sold his business, sold his trailer, sold his horses, sold everything, sold his saddle even, came to try to get a job training the marine mammals. Well, meanwhile, so I started seeing him at work, and then I'd see him in the barn I was riding. What's that?
That was convenient.
That was convenient. So I got him back into horses quite quickly. But anyway, he had ridden with some of the best hunter jumper trainers. So, and one of them that he had ridden with was somebody named B.C. Madden. He'd ridden with George Morris, he'd ridden with Ann Krasinski. And we went out to dinner with John Madden, who was BZ Madden, who was an Olympic gold medalist. I think she's been to 4 Olympics now. And at the time she hadn't. She was just a Grand Prix show jumper of the year. But so we went to dinner with John Madden. John Madden's her husband. And he was there designing courses. And he's like a sponge. So Vinton said, tell him about the training you did with the marine mammals. So I sat down and I, over dinner, just kind of casually told him about the training. And you could see he was more and more intense and asking questions that were really, pertinent. And so at the end of the night, we didn't use clickers with the marine mammals. We used them for a short bit with some of the sea lions, walruses, and otters. But we never called it clicker training, and we didn't use clickers. But I had a bag of clickers from the time we had done it with the sea lions, walruses, and otters. So I sent him home with a clicker and said, and the principles. And so he called it, and you're like, I don't know, that was kind of weird. The next day that he got home, he called, and BZ had a horse that came to her with an issue where you couldn't touch him with a riding stick. Your neighbor couldn't have one, you couldn't have it on the ground, you couldn't have it on their back, you couldn't have a riding stick anywhere near this horse. And he went home and he said, not only did I get this horse to touch the riding stick, I can't get him to stop. He said, so if I could turn that big of a no into that big of a yes, this fast, there's a place for this in Grand Prix show jumping, so please come here, start a business, I'll pay you, we'll start a business, come here, live here, do all this. And so that was where it all started for me. So my time with my own horse, by design, I did not want to do positive reinforcement. I was busy trying to learn how it was done. Now I couldn't help but feed him because I kind of can't help myself, but I didn't systematically go through with bridge conditioning and target training. I just kind of was learning how it was done, but my nature was to be reinforcing. But so when I went to John and Beezy's, now I officially began doing the bridge conditioning, the target training, and teaching the different elements. So I look at my time at their place, it was kind of like my lab time, because now I was figuring out how much of what, how much does it go together, what can you do, where do you need to, what, and figuring out how it all worked together. And with John and Beezy, it was amazing because he had horses who were young, horses who were old, horses from Europe, horses from Argentina, horses that were thoroughbreds, so you had this whole mix of different horses and different backgrounds. And so it was really a great opportunity. And so that is where I put it together. But that very first week, so since I moved into the horses from the marine mammals, I got technique up the wazoo. I mean, I knew how to train anything because you were absorbed in this intense training structure. And you had years of decades of experience all around you that you could constantly lean on and go to. So with but once I left the marine mammals and went to the horses, now I started actually seeing the depth and the breadth of the training. The marine mammals learned on a certain trajectory. So they get positive reinforcement introduced to their lives, and they go through this kind of certain trajectory. They have a lot of consistency, they have a lot of good experienced people and trainers all around them, and it never falters or never wavers. It just is this nice, steady path. So you kind of looked at it as a means to an end. It was a way to train stuff. Now you couldn't forget about the emotional part because they enjoyed doing it. They weren't doing it, the food was a catalyst for training, but they weren't doing it for the food. They got all their food no matter what. So it was trying to make it fun. But you didn't really think about how much was going on underneath the surface until I started working with horses. I would say I've learned 50 times more since leaving there because it's, then now your technique's good, but now the problem solving really comes in because with marine mammals you weren't problem solving as much as you are with the horses. So you get horses who come in with loads of baggage. Now you're having to unpack and change things and do things, and that part was really, this has been a huge change. So one of the very first things is that first week I worked with John and BZ Madden. So we go there just to see, do us humans all get along? And it was the first time to try with the horses, but it was a lot about moving to upstate New York and living with John and BZ from Southern California. So that very first week, all I did 3 5-minute sessions a day in their stall of clicker conditioning or bridge conditioning. This is a bridge signal. So I click, feed, click, feed, click, feed. I did 3 5-minute sessions a day after that first 3 days. The next 3 days, I did 3 5-minute sessions a day to teach them to touch a target. That's all I did with them. I never left their stall with them. They left and did other things. They had normal days that were full of turnout and grooming and ridden and stuff, but I never took them out of their stall or did anything with them Beezy, on the other hand, never came into their stall and did anything with them. We watched each other do things, but nobody interacted with the other. Yet, at the end of the week, and if anybody knows Beezy, Beezy Madden is the type that never says superfluous stuff. She would never say cute hair. That just would never come out of her mouth. That's just not pertinent, So when Beezy says stuff, everybody really does go, because she's very selective what she says. So at the end of the week, she said, those 8 horses you're working are remarkably better in the arena. But at this point, the training didn't have anything to do with anything. So this was the beginning of, that's interesting. And now it begins. And this was the very beginning of me going, well, that's really interesting. So while it didn't even interact, it made a huge difference. And then once we decided to work together, John's like, you train them anything. I don't care. Every single horse that came through those doors got bridge conditioning and target training, no matter what. And they goes, I don't care. You can teach them to stand on their head or to smile or bow, whatever floats your boat, because it makes them happier. And when they're happier, they perform better. So it's a little selfish means on his end, but I didn't care because it made me happy. So that was where it kind of began. And now with neurobiologists are now catching up with what I have seen anecdotally for decades. Now we're starting to get an explanation for why it is and what's happening. And so it's a very exciting time for the psychology side of it, because now it's starting to be what was considered soft science is starting to get hard science behind it to back it up. So it is very exciting. So anyway, so that's where it all started. So with them, I worked on everything, we had so many different things that we worked on. Basically, they didn't have a bunch of under saddle issues. Beezy picks horses who like their jobs and like to jump. So she was never climbing uphill with a horse. She bought horses who already like their job. Her nature is very non-confrontational, so she's very soft, and she tends to just get horses who like it. So we weren't having to overcome big issues typically with ridden stuff, but there were things that they would come with, So one horse would bolt to the paddock, and one horse he would rear if you asked him to back up, and one horse would, we just had different things. So we got to work with a whole plethora of things. But after about a year with them, I realized, but this isn't just for Grand Prix show jumping. This is for everything under the sun. So while with them, I had the exposure that, I got to work with Olympic dressage riders right before they went to the Olympics with their horses. I got to work with, Olympic jumpers, Olympic dressage riders, international drivers, international eventers. And the very first clinic I booked was for the United States Equestrian Federation. So I thought, I better practice before I get to that actual clinic. So I got to start at the top, which is a real benefit because you're getting to work directly right up there at the top. And that was great, but I did realize it's not just for them. So that's when I branched out and started doing expos and wrote the book and really kind of got back out there. And again, this was 20 years ago at this point, over 20 years ago.
And the name of that book?
Oh, you can train your horse to do anything, clicker training and beyond.
And there's a new book coming out called?
We don't have a name for that one yet.
Oh.
It's a connection training book that we're also working on, and we haven't determined a title yet.
So, did you give Maria a definition of positive reinforcement?
No, we're going to get there next. So this is where I branched off Maria, and I kind of realized it's not just here, it's for everything. What's interesting though, in the very beginning, I would have the highest level, was all on board, yep, we love it, I'll take everything I can get, and the brand new people were on board. Who the tricky ones were back then were all the people in between. So it was kind of like the trainers that hadn't reached the pinnacle, were still kind of struggling to get somewhere that they weren't yet. They didn't want to go against the flow. But now that's changed. Now people bring clients and they're, everybody's. But back then it was a challenge. Who I got, the middle people, when they came, is when they're like, I'll do anything. I've tried everything to fix this, and I'll go to you, crazy lady. They didn't say that, but in essence, they're like, I'll go to the wacky, out of left field lady. And then I'd say, okay, that's fine, but you have to be a part of the training. And then once they kind of got to know the training, they're like, well, this makes sense. Gosh, I could work on his injections too, or whatever it was. But it was the people that were desperate is where you first got them. And you'd go, that's fine, we'll just work on this. And then pretty soon, they started going, wow, and they would branch out and do other things. Okay, so positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. When I first started, I couldn't say negative reinforcement, even when I defined it. people would just get hung up on it because it had a social definition that was very strong and very hard. It would just make people cringe almost. But socially, back then, negative reinforcement meant you beat your horse. Positive reinforcement meant you don't beat your horse. I mean, that's kind of how simple people really thought of it. Well, that's not the definition at all. It's not how it's written. That's not where it came from. It was written by science and math people. So think in math, when you had a negative number or a positive number, one wasn't good and one wasn't bad. One didn't mean you beat the equation. It just simply mean one was added to the equation, which increased the frequency of behavior. One was subtracted from the equation, which increased the frequency of behavior. Does everybody follow with that? So it's not good or bad, it's just add and subtract, just like a positive and negative number. So traditional horse training, natural horsemanship training, is all based in negative reinforcement. Think about it, it's pressure and release. It is the subtraction of the release that increases the frequency of or the subtraction of the pressure, which increases the frequency of behavior. Does that make sense to everybody? So you want your horse to go forward, traditionally, you want your horse to go forward, you squeeze with your legs. If they go, as soon as they go forward, you release that pressure. If they don't, you tend to increase that pressure. So that's kind of how things historically have been taught with horses. So it is the removal of that pressure is what they're working for, the subtraction. Positive reinforcement means something is added to the equation, which increases the frequency of behavior. So a reinforcer, all a reinforcer means is it increases the frequency of behavior. So that's the behavior that precedes it. So that's a reinforcer. Negative and positive means something added, something subtracted. So think about when you want your horse to go forward, squeeze with your legs, they're good, you remove the pressure. We're walking with a halter or even a bridle. We want them to stop or slow down. We apply pressure. When they're good, we remove that. So that's just how it's been done. Positive reinforcement, on the other hand, is adding something appetitive, something they want, something they like to the equation, which increases the frequency of behavior. This is a part that hasn't historically been done. And this is a part where people also get this a little confused. People like, yes, well, he was good and I gave him a rest. But we created the need for that rest. So the rest isn't actually, he's not walking around going, I want a rest. We create the need for the rest. So a rest isn't actually positive reinforcement, it is a relief of working. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's a common one. I even, just recently, it was a horse and rider article gal, and she, interviewed me and said, that's great, I'm going to use all this. And then she talks about positive reinforcement being a rest. And I thought, oh, I'll just let it go. But it's not quite right. Anyway, so that's positive and negative reinforcement.
Can you give a human parallel, like, I don't know, restriction on allowance or?
So for positive or negative reinforcement? Positive reinforcement would be you do something good, I give you a reward after you do something good. If I said you do it and I'll give you a reward, now we're into a bribe. So this is different. This comes a little bit out of the blue. There becomes some predictability to it because they get it. I get how this thing works. But while at first we're going, I'm going to give it to you there, I'm going to give it to you there, I'm going to give it to you there, and I'm going to give it here, here. So if you have a kid who just out of the blue cleans their room, and you come up and go, you know what? Let's go to do your favorite thing today. Let's go buy you whatever, whatever your favorite thing is. So they're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. What did I just do that earned me that reward? That's where positive reinforcement would come in. So negative reinforcement would be, now this gets a little tricky because negative reinforcement into punishment can be a little, so now we're going to go into a little weird diversion that I don't go into very often. There's punishers. So there's operant conditioning is a whole world we're talking about. So operant conditioning is you're using it whether you know it or not. Your horse learns through operant conditioning, that's going on. Negative reinforcement is a part of operant conditioning. You are using science when you're training your horse. So the more you understand, the better you'll be at being a better communicator, partner, trainer for your horse. So there's quadrants, and things get a little muddy in parts of it, but there's the positive and negative reinforcement. There's positive and negative punishment. Okay, so while a reinforcer increases the frequency of behavior, a punisher decreases the frequency of behavior. So this can walk a muddy line sometimes, but did you know, like if I gave my horse, and I didn't know he didn't like apples, but I gave him apples every time he did something, I'm actually could be punishing him because the behavior may cease because of it. Does that make sense to people? So it's a punisher just decreases the frequency of behavior. So you can offer something in good intentions and actually be decreasing the frequency of behavior. Likewise, we could be giving something we think they value, and it's not up to us to determine the value. They determine the value on all of those. But, so, as I think of a human example, if I say, you're going to, you know, if you don't do this, I'm taking away your video games, that could be a punisher, not negative reinforcement. But if I continue to say, clean your room, clean your room, did you clean your room, did you clean your room, did you clean your room? And then, in order to get that nagging to stop, they would clean the room. Does that make sense? Not sure that's the best example, but you can see where that line could be a little bit muddy. So, anyway, thanks for clearing that up, Melissa. But anyway, and it does happen in our lives all the time. And what I find I do is I do draw a lot of attention to the good things that happen. You know, there's a tendency for, I found in myself, if something went wrong somewhere, I wanted to get on their website and tell them that that wasn't right. But I find myself saying, but you know what, that was good. I need to get on that website and tell them when it's good. So you kind of find your own little shift in focusing on what's good as opposed to focusing on what's bad. Okay, so I went off a little bit there. But anyway, so that's a little bit more than you maybe wanted to know, but it is all the realm of operant conditioning, meaning we're learning to operate on our environment. Our horses are learning to operate on their environment, trying to figure out what do I get, what works for me. A good example of positive reinforcement in a horse's environment would be, let's say that your horse is standing under an apple tree and he's grazing. And then a fly comes along and is bugging him, and he finally kicks the tree, and then like an apple falls. And he eats the apples and thinks, I don't know what that happened. And then they're going along and eating grass again, and then another fly, and he bangs the tree again. Starts thinking, wait, when I bang that tree, I make apples fall. And that would be a classic kind of learning positive reinforcement in their own environment. So anyway, so operant conditioning going on all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. And so what we do is we want to be aware of it because we can affect, it incorporates how they learn. Really what we work on is called applied learning theory. And it is understanding how they learn, how they work, how their mind works, how do we increase the frequency of behavior, decrease the frequency of behavior, and underneath of it all, so it's not just a means to an end in order to get a canter to part. I like to focus on the emotional component that's going on underneath. The teaching that as a means to an end, I think that's gotten some people in trouble because they forget the emotions that are part of it. And to me, the biggest part of that equation is the emotional component that is happening in their head. And I think that that part is really, really significant. This is the byproduct of positive reinforcement that is such a big benefit. So, so what I like to do is pay attention to all the pieces that are behind it. So positive and negative reinforcement. So we talked about what that is. But this is a part that now, there's some components to it that make it why I would select to use one over the other. One, it's been proven with negative reinforcement, in order to raise criteria, we tend to have to raise the pressure. So if you want more, you got to put more pressure until you start getting more. With positive reinforcement, they tend to raise their own criteria. So something that even we saw it today a little bit with Romeo a little bit when I wasn't clicking, and then pretty soon his head's going further away until he's kind of going, I'm just going to stand with my head right over here. And that was him doing it on his own. I wasn't doing more to get more. He was kind of thinking, well, this is good. This must be better. And so that is really a huge thing to keep in mind, is they will start raising their own criteria. But why do they raise their own criteria? Because we put something in it for them. So think about it with traditional training. So what's in it for your horse to do a flying lead change? Not a lot. But we start putting positive reinforcement in it, now there is something in it that they value. And this is the game changer. This is when things start to change, because all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, you mean there's something in it for me? They become invested in the training and the outcome of the training, and that is when things really, really change. So I think that that's really, really important. But think about it, not to make it sound, I mean, this kind of sounds a little bit cold, but think about any good business deal. If you're in a business deal, you want everybody to walk away happy. You don't want away going, I got mine. You know, you want everybody to be in a good place where they come back and go, let's do that again, because I'm happy and you're happy. And when I think about it with the horses, that's what I want. I want horses or dogs or whatever it is, that I want them to be happy, that they go, this was great, I want to do this again. And I think that that's really important, and by putting positive reinforcement in it, all of a sudden we really do get a chance to change that, and it changes their focus. So I think that that part's really important. But another thing now that neurobiologists are starting to figure out, so now they can do so much more. They can figure out, they can use PET scans and CAT scans and MRIs, and when does dopamine spike, when does serotonin levels rise, when does this, when does that. And one of the things they found is when animals are being taught through negative reinforcement, they tend to use a different part of the brain as when they're being taught with positive reinforcement. And this is really pretty significant because the area that tends to light up for negative reinforcement tends to be the area responsible for fight or flight. So in that part of the brain responsible for fight or flight, things are produced, chemicals are produced in there that have to do with stress hormones. So now we have cortisol, and we have things that are stressy hormones being produced there. Well, what results from those is emotions. There's different emotions that come out of those. With positive reinforcement, it tends to light up the part of the brain responsible for what has been termed the seeking system. It is the things they want, the things they desire, the things they're working for. In that part of the brain, we have different chemicals being produced. Those chemicals tend to be endorphins and dopamine. So those things, so now the resulting emotions from those chemicals are different. So now we have kind of happier emotions and kind of more fear-based emotions. So, and then what happens is when they learn new behaviors, or a lot of times what happens when they repeat that behavior, the original emotions come forward when they repeat that behavior. So it doesn't mean we can't change it, we definitely can, but there's a tendency that that's what happens. A good example of this, I think, is when there's a horse at John and Beezy Madden. So he was a client's Grand Prix show jumper. So he was like a 10-year-old horse. He was just really good. He was really stable. That's what you get when you have an amateur owner client doing Grand Prix. You get a good, sensible horse. So he had no problems in his little time that anybody had known him. So I went to the show up in New Hampshire, and I did 3 days of bridge conditioning and 3 days of target training. So I did click feed, 3 5-minute sessions a day, and then I did 3 5-minute sessions a day of target training. I never did anything more with them because I had enough horses to deal with that maybe had more important things or bigger things, but he was very sensible. So it's like, he has a foundation. Everybody who came through there got bridge conditioned, target trained, because now you have the foundation on them. If something goes wrong, you can go, okay, we know we have that part, let's get back to it, but we also knew it made them happier. And I think that what I was seeing with John and Beezy's horses, and then subsequently saw over and over again, was the horses were happier and happier in the arena. I'm sure it's because the endorphins and dopamines floating through their body. I used to say it was like being in love, because I was like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like the horses are in love. They just get happier. But you know, like when you're all in love and you're new in love and the horse can step on your foot, and you're like, ow, I think you broke it. You know, and it hurts, but you're softer about it. But if you're not in a good place and they step on your foot, you're mad, and it hurts a lot, and all you see is the doom and gloom, and the worst part of how this is now, what am I, and that's kind of what it felt like, which now I think it's just the dopamine surging through it, so it gives me a little better explanation. But with this horse at John and Beezy, so 4 months before this event, he had bridge conditioning, target training at a show. I mean, it was in the little tents, the show tents. It wasn't even at home. So 4 months later, he's at home, and he is turned out in the paddock. It was the first day it snowed, but he'd been in plenty of snow in his life. He wasn't a baby, but for some reason, nobody could catch him. When they would go up to the paddock to go get him, he would just snore and be terrified, and his tail would come up, and he'd run away. And then you go to leave, and he'd come running back to the gate, like, don't leave me, don't leave me. And you go, okay, I'll come get you. And then he would start this cycle over and over. So for 5 hours, nobody could catch him. All the different grooms went out. They tried and tried and tried, and it was the end of the day, and I was getting ready to go home. And I thought, well, now keep in mind, I really only had done re-mammals. We didn't leave them for chunks of time, not doing, I didn't know what this was going to look like. So I said, you know what, you guys, I went back. I was in the car. I was living off the farm by now. I was getting in the car to go home, and I thought, you know, we did have the target, and so I went in and said, you guys, I did teach him the target at one point, and they said, well, he hasn't seen it for months, we haven't done it here, and besides that, we went out with buckets of food and carrots, and we couldn't get through to him. So the food's not working. And I said, yeah, but we have nothing left to lose. They said, well, that's true. And they're very supportive, but you know, as I walked out the door, they're probably all like, you know, so I get my target, my side bucket, and clicker, and I kind of go marching out there, and I go up to his paddock, and just like they said, he runs away like a big giant Arabian, and he is terrified, and then I go to leave, and he walks away. I mean, he comes running back up. Well, one of the principles behind this training, you always want to click on the action you want to see more of. So as I go running away, and he starts coming up, I click, and then I turn around kind of slow, and he's probably 20 feet off like this. So he's not comfortable, but he's not moving now for the first time. So I turn around, and I just held the target over the fence, and I said, target. He said, oh, the target. And he dropped his head and relaxed and walked up, touched the target, and walked home with me like normal. He didn't jig, he didn't jog, he didn't do whatever. I mean, he was just completely normal now. So it wasn't like, I'm with you, but I'm still wound up. It was gone. And so whatever had him so over threshold for 5 hours, emotionally, he let it go and went completely to the place of the target. And so I kind of was like, here's your horse. I mean, it was another one of those things, you're like, I don't know what to say. I like it, I just don't know what to say. So that was that emotional, taking him from one emotional place and bringing him to the emotional place that was part of the training and learning the target. So that part that was now a big thing I use quite a bit, is the safety that's involved in the target. And one other thing I'm going to point out while I'm on the target story is I always would teach my horses to do, and this is a leftover from the marine mammal trainers. With the marine mammal, every animal learns targeting, stationing, and separations immediately because they live in social structures. So I've got 7 sea lions in there. I need to call one of them out. They're all barking, you know. So you come up and go, bed, and they all go up on the bed. And then you'd be like, Rufus. And Rufus would pop down, and everybody waits. So this is one of the early things you do. It's just normal for me. I quite like it. And so I would always teach my horses to do stationary targeting. So they have them in their, you know, you can have them in the trailer, you can have them in their paddock, you can have them in their stall. So when I come up to the stall, I just say target, and they go back and they hold on their stationary target. You can open the door, enter the stall, exit the stall, close the door, pick up their feet, put food in their butt, and you just see them kind of going, you know, they kind of watch you, but they stay put. So this is just something I've always done. And so I do it all the time. And it gives me a lot of information, but they go really slow and kind of like, okay, I see we're in a weird place. Or if they fly over the, whatever it is, it always kind of gave me a little read on where we were. And it was a way to say, are you ready to start the session? So they would always do this. Well, one day, guys were working in the hayloft, and it was, something happened up there. It was the end of the day, everybody's back in their stalls. I was cleaning tack across, we had a big aisle, and I was cleaning tack across the aisle, and the guys in the hayloft, something happened that was so loud that I jumped. And both of the horses immediately jumped. But what they did is when they jumped, they flew to their stationary targets. And so you're kind of like, what was that? So I'm just cleaning tack, and I jump, and then I see them go, Coach! And then they kind of look off, and then they come back, and then they start eating hay again. But for that instant when they flew to their target, you're like, what was that about? So what it told me is basically, it was their safe spot. So when everything was up in the air or scary, they just flew there as, this is my safe spot, I'm going to go here to be safe. So that was me again going, what was that about? And then I had a gal who came to a clinic, she was in Southern Pines, and she came to a clinic, and I guess she'd been to a clinic somewhere years ago. I didn't remember her, but it was like 10 years later at least. And she said, yeah, I live in Myrtle Beach, and I have a horse who was in a hurricane. So every time it thunderstorms, he loses his noodle. And she said, so I heard your story somewhere, and I went and put stationary targets in, and she covered them in Baker blankets. So anyway, she decorated them, but she put a stationary target in his stall. And she said whenever it would start to change, the weather starts to change, and they know, she'd come in and start just doing targeting, touch your target, oh good, lift your feet, target, till he settled, and then she could leave and he'd be good. And so pretty soon, she would come back in, and he's like, yeah, I'm good. He wouldn't care about thunderstorms anymore, because now he had new emotions, good association. Under this change in pressure, brings good things. So that was all good. So then one day, a tropical storm came through, and a transformer blew. And I don't know if you've heard a transformer blow. I haven't, but I've heard it's like a building blowing up. It's just so loud and so scary. And she ran to the barn, and all the horses are reeling except the one is just eating his hay. So I'm sure at the time he flew to a stationary target, probably went, okay, I'm all good. I just got back to work with. So you can use the training becomes very secure. It builds a lot of security. But I'm going to tell you, it's not really the target that does it. It's the training. It's the history. It's the stuff that goes on in their brains outside of the target. So the target, I think, is very good because it's a visual, it's one consistent thing. They know it. They can see it and lock onto it. But we can get that kind of response just with behavior too, because it's the reinforcement history that was built behind it. So that's a little bit about the emotions and the positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement, and why I choose to go with the positive reinforcement if I can. I don't have a problem with negative reinforcement if we can really, really, really recognize, respect, and respond to their thresholds. So if they're over threshold, and I don't mean this isn't over threshold for me. I mean, that is so far over threshold, we're gone. This is when I feel like they approach threshold. So they're in there, and I come up with a bag in my hand, and they go. Now, it doesn't mean they're over threshold, but I start to go, we're at threshold. Now, this has become a concern, and you locked onto it a little bit, or I just see a little change in the nostrils, or a little change in the eyes, or a little change in the point of the lip. All those things I look at and think, we might be a little over threshold or going over threshold. If we can recognize that, if I ask a horse to move over and they say, no big deal, I just move over, then I'm like, okay, we don't seem to have an unhappy feeling with it. If I say that and they lift their head, step over, I kind of go, okay, now I want to change that. Does that make sense, everybody? So I think negative reinforcement can be done very, 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 very softly, not with escalating pressure, but if we can read where the horse is, then we'll be okay. But it means we have to read it, respect it, and that's the challenging part, because by and large, we haven't been taught to read and respond to such little nuances that they give us. But they're talking to us loud and clear all the time. So if we can recognize that, we get going, I get it, you're not comfortable here, I have a new plan. My thing is, though, I tend to go at everything with positive reinforcement, because that's how I did it. So even people that are part of, my little connection training group will teach things, with ropes or something, and I'm like, oh no, I would do it different, because I think like a marine mammal trainer, so I don't see a need to use it, because I went for 10 years training massive animals without the using things. So I choose to do it completely at liberty if I can, because that gives me the most information. So if they're on a lead rope and they don't necessarily have a choice, that doesn't give me the same information. Here's a good example. It was down here in North Carolina somewhere, and I did a clinic, and then we went out to somebody's. It was a driving person, and she said, come out. Was that with you? It's not ringing a bell. So she said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Come, let's go see my horse. My trainer said it'd be great, and we're having problems putting the bridle on. You're thinking, okay, we're going out in the country with your older trainer who's thinks this is great. I was like, I don't know he's going to think this is great. But anyway, you go out there, and so I have an hour to get this point across with them and how to do it. So they're getting a very quick clinic. And so having a problem with the halter. So the first thing I do is I go into her stall with my side bucket, and I teach her to keep her head away. That's the most important thing. First things, I want to teach manners. I want to do the conditioning, the classic conditioning, which is Pavlovian click feed, but I want to teach manners, and I build relaxation into that. So I go in to do that. I got to build that. The clicker's not valuable unless it means something, if it's been properly conditioned. So I go in and I do that part. And then I go in and say, okay, so we come out for a little bit, let them process, and then we're going back in a few minutes, and I come in with my target, all short like this. Well, she all of a sudden goes to the back of the stall and starts eating the grain off the ground. And I said, she's worried about the target. And you can see the man go, You know, he just thought I was just a fluffernutter. And so I said, here, hold the target. She immediately came right back to me and was wanting food and doing stuff. Said, hand me the target. She went back and just started nibbling the pieces off the ground. Now, that's not something that most people read as nerves. But to me, it was very clear that was nerves, because as soon as we had the target, this was a component that she went and did an avoidance behavior where it's like, I'm just going to casually eat over here. If she was on a halter and lead rope, I wouldn't have seen that. I wouldn't have known that. I either would have got one, a kind of just a lack of response, or two, I might have gotten panic, because now she feels trapped and she has this thing. But this way, she could just go, you know, and I've worked with zebras and Somali wild asses and stuff that'll kick you in the knees before you know it. So it was very important that they had the choice to leave, and that's what they would do. They would just leave if they had a choice. So then I got down on the ground and I sat with the target. She could touch the target, and we built up her confidence. But it was the kind of thing that most people wouldn't have read as nerves, but it is nerves. Another situation was a gal had hired me to come in to work with her 6 horses who were going to move from Colorado to California. And she said, these 2 are good, but these 4 aren't good. And now, we can get them all in the trailer, but it's when the shipping really happens, when it really unraveled or whatever. But those 2 were completely good. And so, and everybody knew the target and the clicker, but they're doing it with the halter and lead rope. So I said, okay, well then let's take the trailer in the arena so we can work them individually at Liberty. So then I asked each of them to load individually at Liberty. The 2 good ones were the 2 worst ones. Once they didn't have a halter and lead rope on, their opinion was very, very different. So it was, with halter and lead rope, they didn't balk. You didn't pull them. You didn't do anything. They loaded. But as soon as they had the choice, they're like, well, I'd rather not. And some people would go, well, then I don't want to hear that. But I do want to hear that, because I can change that. You know, we have tools to make that different. But if I don't know that, I don't know where to start. So like that, I could then go, oh, is it when the divider closes? Is it the ramp? Is it the, you know, whatever it was, I could see what part did your behavior change. And that gives me a bucket load of information that if I don't have them at Liberty, I might not see that. Or the halter and lead rope may represent my lack of choice. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is where, yes?
I'll just interrupt you for just a second. One of the most valuable things that Shawna ever taught me was one of the greatest difficulties that comes with loading. It's not in the loading, it's in the unloading where they're actually most fearful. And that was something that I thought I knew a lot, and I thought I was pretty good at positive reinforcement clicker training, and it was something that I was missing. I was missing the anxiety in the moment that the horse, and I mean, oh, not even a moment, the second that the horse stepped off the ramp. So even when you're used to reading it, and you're used to looking at it, and you're used to reinforcing it at the right second and everything, there's always more to learn, and that's just something that nobody ever thinks about. It's the unloading a lot of times.
And yeah, and I saw that because I didn't know anything about it. I was like, yeah, I'll trade him to load. I'm just an open book. But it was immediately you'd see him kind of start stabbing at the back, you know, and I thought, this isn't a loading problem. This is an unloading. And then you'll get to a point where sometimes you have them like, they're like, I'm ready, I'm going in. I'm like, stop. I don't want you to go in because you're going to overface yourself, you know, and you stop them. And so I train foot on, foot off, 2 feet on, 2 feet off, 3 feet on, 3 feet off, till they get that skill. And that 3rd foot, as soon as I get that 4th foot on, I feed and get them right back out before they forget that they're in there, because then they kind of forget, lose their orientation, then they're like, now I'm afraid. But that's good. So it is working at Liberty that shows you that. You know, that's the part where I could then go, oh, I get that. And that is one of the things that sometimes when people first start with positive reinforcement, they don't want to know that their horse doesn't want to do something. I do, because I have tools to fix it. But if they don't want to do something, and then with these 6 horses, one of those horses was 29 years old, super sway-backed and out of shape. And I said, you cannot think that you're putting him on and traveling through. You're going to travel like 4 hours, and you're going to let him rest for the rest of the day, because he's too old for this, you know. And what's going to happen with that, those 2 good horses that you got in the trailer who aren't actually very comfortable, or they're going to fall apart somewhere on this journey most likely. So I would, whenever I see a hole, I don't want to avoid it. There's times I think it's not the time right yet. I'm going to have to get to that later because we have these other issues, or maybe that's too much right yet. But I want to circle back around to address each of those things. So when people say, but they have a problem, you know, it's food aggressive, or that, I'm like, well, let's dive headlong, you know, and because I look at it and I think that's a hole in their psyche. If they're worried or unsettled or don't like something, it continues to be a hole in their psyche. And while we maybe can make them do it, one of the things that's been shown also with negative reinforcement, a lot of times what happens is if they don't have a choice, if they're pushed into a situation or if they're flooded, that a lot of times other things will go bad. So now something that was good, now something else is falling apart that you don't know what that's related to. Likewise, with positive reinforcement, a lot of times you fix one thing and other things get better. You're like, who knew? There's a gal, the Cadwells. So there's Randy and Keely Cadwell are big international champion drivers in Southern Pines. And they had a horse who was, so Randy came to the clinic, brought her horse who she'd won the worlds on. He was a pony. And her sister, meanwhile, was teaching the Paralympic team, the Paralympic team. And so she was away. Well, she had a horse named Timex who was not so good about standing still, not so good about his feet, blah, blah, blah. So she brings her pony, and he pile drives me around the whole barn at first. But anyway, we sorted it out, and we had fun. And she thought, I'm just going to teach him tricks. And then she's like, this just isn't for tricks. Because she just does this. She cross-trains everything. I'm not going to take this to a new place even. But anyway, so she comes, and then she thinks, I'm going to work on Keely's horse, Timex, with his feet, because he's not so good with feet. 3 days, she had him lifting his feet. And, no problem. Then they had to tranquilize him. I mean, that's how it went. And now he was fine. Well, then they go to USET. They're in Kentucky, for a team event. And their coach said, wait, I know this horse, but not this horse. And they said, no, you know this horse. And he said, that's not Timex. He never stands like that. And he said, that's Timex. So they didn't work on standing still. They worked on feet. But a byproduct was he just learned to stand still all over the place. So you're kind of like, what are things I love about Randy? So she just cross-trains everything, does everything, gets everything. They just live for those horses. And so she would cross-train him to be ridden. He's a pony, so we have a friend who's a little person, and she would ride the pony. And she said, he likes ridden dressage more than he likes driven stuff. And he likes driven stuff. I mean, he was really good. It's not like he didn't like it. Those two were really close, and they were just like brother and sisters as they go. And she said, but he likes the ridden stuff better. So she sold that horse to a little girl for a dressage pony. And people are like, he's young, he's sound, you could have won again. She said, but he's happier doing that. So people thought she was crazy to sell him to a little girl for a dressage pony when she won, could have sold him to another driving person for a lot of money, but that wasn't the point. He was happier doing this, so she said, I'll go on and do this with him, or let him go off to be a little girl's pony. And people were saying, you're crazy. What are you doing? That's ridiculous. You're crazy. You could have won. She said, I'll just teach another one. And sure enough, next time, 4 years later, she didn't win, but she's back up there with the team. She's in Slovakia or wherever, was it Slovenia or France or wherever it was that they were going that time to do the next round. And I love that because I think that's a mentality we start to absorb as we start to recognize their emotional component and their emotional well-being. And to make that choice to me was just amazing. I wish we could all think like that, but also have the confidence, like I'll just find another one who likes it more and and goes along and does it. So it was really, so I love that story. So anyway, so positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Okay, we talked about the clicker. Now the clicker technically is called a bridge signal. Now it's called a bridge signal because it bridges a time lapse between the moment which they do something correct and the moment which we can reinforce that behavior. So it just bridges this gap. That's why we call it a bridge signal. And like I said, in the marine mammal world, we never called it clicker training. That came from the dog world. So we didn't say click, we said bridge. I bridged that. Did you bridge that? That was a good bridge. It's turned into a verb. So it is a good bridge. We bridge, bridge, bridge. So that is what we thought of it as. And that is, so I slip back to that very quickly. So you can interject click to bridge, bridge to click, because they're basically saying the same thing. And so, and like with the marine mammals, we used a high-pitched whistle, a dog whistle. So we just tweet, or we use the verbal bridge signal for the pinnipeds, the sea lions, walruses, and the otters of okay. So we had a verbal bridge signal or we had the whistle. So but I like the clicker. I think the clicker is really good for horses because the horses aren't always next to us. So they can be across a paddock and they can hear the click. They can be jumping and jump, they can hear the click. They can be running, they can hear the click. It sounds the same between me and you and you and you and you. And like with John and Peasy, they had male grooms, female grooms. So it was very nice that it sounded the same, but it could be heard over high octane behaviors going on. So I like the click. And when I would first order these, you couldn't get them in Petco. This was decades ago. And so I had to order them. And when I ordered them, they would sometimes send me quiet ones, and I'd send them back and say, nope, I need loud ones. And I'd tell them early on, I need loud clickers, because I wanted them to be distinct and be loud and heard over things. So it doesn't matter what you want it to be. I like the clicker because I think it is so distinct and clear. I use a verbal bridge signal too, but I go to the verbal bridge signal once a behavior is trained. The problem with the verbal bridge signal is they're somewhat desensitized to the sounds of our voices. They hear us talking all the time. So it kind of dulls the impact of the voice. When the click means one thing and one thing only. So when I teach a new behavior, while I may fade to the click or to the verbal bridge signal, and plus I don't always have a clicker on me. So we're walking along and a deer jumps out in front of us. I want to say, good boy. I want to let them know that was a really good decision not to fly away. So I use a verbal bridge signal, but if I'm teaching something new, I pull that clicker right back out because I want to be sure that this is the thing that means, and I pull out my original target. While I may have other things, these items are the ones that I go to when it's time to teach something new. So does that make sense to everybody? So the clicker isn't magic. The clicker isn't anything. The clicker's even aversive for some horses at first. You click and they're like, what's that? And they could be, you have to muffle it in your pocket or that fold under my cheek that I didn't used to have. I do now, back behind my hiney. Anyway, so I muffle it somewhere, so it is much quieter until they get used to it. In short order, they're like, I love that sound, I'm good. But in the beginning, it means nothing. So it's taught through Pavlovian, or classic conditioning. So it is click, feed, click, feed, click, feed, click, feed. Till what we're doing, we're pairing something that is physically a reinforcer and pairing it with something that we want to take on a reinforcing value. So at the end of and that's why when I say do it 3 5-minute sessions a day for 3 days, or if you see your horse once a day, do it 2 sessions a day for 4 days. At the end of that, you have overtrained it. But I don't want there to be any mistake that this clicker is conditioned as a conditioned reinforcer. Because if it's not, if we haven't we haven't paired it with that value long enough, it won't hold that when we click, we're not telling them the thing that we think we are. So there's a gal who I was going to do a clinic in New Jersey, and I show up the day before, and I'm walking around, and there's a gal there and said, I'm so glad you're here because I'm teaching my little filly to lift her leg. But it's almost like she pulls her leg out of my hand and puts it back on the ground. Her hand, listen to me, all a little anthropomorphic, eh? So they're pulling her hoof out of my hand and putting it back on the ground. And I said, okay, so walk me through this. Are you using a bridge signal, a clicker, anything like that? No, I'm not. Okay, so walk me through it. She goes, well, I pick her feet and then I feed her when I'm done. And I said, so where's her foot? And you can see her going, it's on the ground. So it was indeed, the little horse was thinking, you know what, let's get done with this foot because as soon as it's on the ground, I get fed. Because she's feeding when it was on the ground, the horse makes the correlation, it's on the ground. The woman's thinking, I'm feeding you because your hoof's up. But nobody said that to the horse. So by adding a clicker in there, we could actually say, this is what I'm feeding you for. Even though the foot is on the ground, we've communicated at this point that that's what's getting reinforced. So I cannot imagine training without a bridge signal. I just can't. It would be sloppy and muddy, and who knows what I'm reinforcing. But when I have a well-conditioned bridge signal, I have one, it is a conditioned reinforcer. So once it is paired with it, it is a conditioned reinforcer, so it holds value. So I can't imagine telling horse that's a good canter depart and then feeding when we stop. Now what is he going to think? He's going to be, I'm just getting fed when we stop. If I use a clicker in there, I say that is what I liked. And I also think I'm training their head. If I train the brain, the body will follow. So when I get that commitment, I click and say, I like what you're thinking, and that's going to lead to, progressively more. But so when I can say, yes, that was perfect, thank you. That was good. You've just earned yourself some sort of reward. So I have a way to bridge that gap. Without that, I don't. I just can't, it would just see, so there's little nuances that we catch all the time that I like. I like when I get that little moment when we shift or shift or shift or shift or whatever it is, and I can click and say that's it. This is how specific they get with it. I taught my horse, I would do expos all the time. So, because way back when, it was a great way to reach people who had no clue about anything. And I would take my horses with me. So we had 4 horses traveling in a 42-foot trailer for weeks on end. But they had a great time and they liked it, and I'd take them out and we'd do demos. And if I just rode, who knows how I trained that. But if I taught stuff, you know, if I say back up, and the horse backs up the length of the arena, if he doesn't hear a click, he rounds that corner. If he doesn't hear a click, he rounds that. And then people are like, wait, what? You know, they could see how much was them and how much was me. So I trained fun stuff all the time. Well, I got the idea I was going to train Minty to do a hop. So what I would do, I would ask for his leg, and I'd support it just with 2 fingers so he could let it down if he wanted to, but kind of he needed to know that that was the right thing. So I'd ask for his leg, and then I'd hold the target. And you could see he was a little perplexed, and then he brought his hind end underneath of him, so I clicked that. It's like, yep, you got to get underneath to get off the front edge, so I clicked that, and then it progressed till he was touching the target. Well, he was hopping and going to the target. So, you know, after about a week, I'm like, ta-da! And what I got was, it was so heavy on the forehand because I kept clicking forward that you thought he was going to land on his nose. It was, and you know, you do go, ta-da, look what I trained. It's the ugliest behavior ever. And so I thought, okay, I need to change this. This isn't what I like. And so I thought, what do I need? I need up. I need more up in this because I'm getting flat. And I thought, is there any point in this behavior as it stands when I get up? And I thought, yes. The second he pushes off the ground, I get up for an instant. And so all I did was change the timing of my click to that up. Within minutes, I had little rears. So he got the idea we're going up till he raised his own criteria, and this is what I had. I'd say hop, and he'd go, and I was like, well, that's a little much now. We need a little balance here. But that is how much, all I did was change the timing in a now trained behavior, a split second, and the whole topography of the behavior changed. So that's how much. Now granted, he was a horse who knew and understood the click. He had been trained things, he knew things, but he didn't just, he still was paying attention to what did I just do to earn me the click. So I think it's really an important lesson that we remember that it becomes quite vital, and you always want to click on when you want to see more of. And so, and people say, but the timing is crucial, but your timing is crucial with traditional training too. And frankly, it's the same timing. When I started riding with, started working with Beezy, I'd already been training, I'd trained dozens of marine mammal trainers to come along and be trainers. So I'm used to lousy timing because they weren't trainers before. They're, you know, biologists and stuff. So they come in and they'd have lousy timing. And so I'm used to this teaching the timing and being patient with bad timing. I started working with Beezy. I was like, your timing is amazing. But of course it's amazing. It's already amazing in traditional. That's why she's so good at it, is she knows exactly when to release, that split second. Meanwhile, she watched me ride. Now keep in mind, I've been riding like a year. And I was riding a horse who was running away with me. And it was one of her horses. And she said, whole long story, but she said, you know, half halt. And I got off and she said, you really have really, really good timing. But of course I did. It's the same timing. You know, so she didn't say you rode well. She said you have really good timing. Let's keep that in mind. But it's the same timing. So the timing is the timing. What you get stronger at on one is the same timing. So while it's crucial, it is also crucial regardless. So both of it helps you to get better. So the clicker is really important because of that element. So it becomes a communication tool that tells him, yes, what you've just done is correct. Now you come to me for some sort of reward. So it is really important that I can't imagine training without some sort of bridge signal. And then target we'll talk about more tomorrow because I just run myself. But really quick, the target is now for me, the new halter and lead rope. So if I need a horse to do something and I don't have a halter and lead rope, I want to do it at liberty, what am I going to do? With the target, I use the target to train everything. But it's the same with the marine mammals. Everything was trained. So the clicker tells them when they did something correct. The positive reinforcement, utilizing food. And food is one of the things they need to survive. They need food, air, water, sleep, and procreation. So food, air, water, and sleep are for the individual. Procreation is for the species. A horse can live without moving. A horse can live they can live without procreation, but the species will die. But if they're in a stall, they need food, air, water, sleep. So because of that, they're hardwired for those things. And think of a baby horse when it's born. Second it's born, what does it get? Air. What does it get usually within an hour? Food and water. What does it usually get the next hour? Sleep. Nobody had to teach any of that. They were hardwired for it. So food is actually a huge and very valuable reinforcer. More valuable than anything we currently hold in our training system. The trick is, how do you do it in a way that is constructive and not creating a problematic situation? And that's what we're learning about here today. So the target is important. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. A little teaser for you, because here she comes.
I'm the floor in just a second to Shawna for you guys to ask her questions or chit chat among yourselves or ask me questions or whatever. But I did just want to again thank you for coming. I thank you for your donation. Shawna donated her time today, so the donation money goes to cover expenses of food and travel for her to be here. Also, very big thank you to our sponsors, because I know you probably think that the clinic fees are expensive, but to be honest, they're not as expensive as they are in a lot of places, and they do not cover the entire cost of the clinic. So our sponsors being Susie and Al Newberry of Newberry's Blueberries here in Burgaw, Chris Steele, my husband, at Cape Fear Drilling Services, and of course, my business, Victory Land Dressage. I do not only do dressage. It is certainly one of my passions, but the biggest thing that I'm passionate about is making horses' lives and the people who love them better, which is why we have Shawna here. So thank you for coming, and I hope that you will embrace this style of training. And if you have any questions after this, I'm happy to do like a 30-minute consult with you or whatever. Business cards on the table, so you can call me tomorrow if you want to come and watch your Sunday. We'll have a lot of horses Sunday. I can't promise you what tomorrow's going to be like because of the weather, so that's up to you. We will start at 8 o'clock. You are welcome. There's an auditor fee of $20 for adults and $10 for youth of 15 and under. So we welcome you. Cape Fear Dressage, the Combined Training Association, the President's Virginia, back here in the corner. She has graciously sponsored lunch tomorrow. So please come and join us, and I'll open the floor.
And Melissa's terrific. I'm here in support of Melissa, and we've known each other for years. So definitely go to Melissa for, I'm here kind of just extra, but she'll get you
Can I
through.
add? You also have great online stuff, the connection training
Yeah.
online.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's so many videos, and then you have the chat forum.